All right, so here we go. So we are on 102b2. We're the Mishnah, right? Wait, did we? Oh, you know what? You're right. Oh, you're right. Missed that. 102b1. Okay, fine. Here we go. Okay, fine. Let's go. Machzirin sir hatachtum migdash. A person's allowed to reinsert a bottom pivot of a closet in the base of Mikdash, of a loba Medina, but not in the anywhere outside the base of Mikdash. Okay, so this goes back to the same principle. We're going on a bit of a tangent right now. We're no longer talking about Eruvin. We have left the Eruvin world for a little bit. We're talking about the distinctions between things that can be done in the base of Mikdash as opposed to things that can be done outside the base of Mikdash. And the general rule is that when it comes to rabbinic prohibitions, they are waived in the base of Mikdash if they serve a purpose for the base of Mikdash. So if you have a closet over here, the closet is in the base of Mikdash region. It's on the Temple Mount. It's a place that they're using to store the oils or the spices or whatever it is, and the bottom pivot of a closet falls out. So to put the bottom pivot back in, that is something which is not prohibited that's something which is rabbinically prohibited, and therefore it's allowed to be done in the base of Mikdash of a loba Medina, but not outside the base of Mikdash. The Elyon, but the top one, which is the main one, okay, if the top one comes out as well, and that's what happens if the top one falls out is that the whole thing is broken, then kan v'kan aser, then to put them back not only everywhere else, but even in the base of Mikdash is going to be prohibited, because that is going to be biblically prohibited, because if the top one comes out, then the door comes off as well. And if the door comes off, then you don't have a structure at all, and then you're basically rebuilding. To rebuild on Shabbos is going to be also. Again, if the top one stands and just the bottom one comes out, then it's loose, it's shaky, right? But if the top one comes out, then gravity will basically cause the door to fall off, and then you have something which is completely deconstructed, and therefore to reattach it, to attach the top one, that's going to be Asr Mida Araisa, because you're going to be building, and therefore it cannot be done even in the base of Mikdash. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ha'elyon ba'mikdash v'tachton ba'medina. Similar to what we saw earlier, Rabbi Yehuda has a more lenient view, and here he says that the top one is also only rabbinically prohibited. He says at the end of the day, it's not rebuilding, it's just the pivot that fell off. The thing is still there, even though it's attached only by the bottom one, and therefore reattaching the top pivot, the top hinge, is something which is only going to be prohibited rabbinically, and therefore it could be done in the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, Tan Rabbanan, the Brisa. Yeah.
Recap this real quick, just because I know I'm going to miss all of it. So
okay. Basically, we have like two pivots. We have like two hinges essentially. We have like a closet with two hinges,
right.
And
bottom and top.
So we can understand that the top one. So there's at least the Chachamim hold that the top, when the top one, everyone agrees the bottom one goes out. That's just rabbinically prohibited to return it. Why? Because as long as the top one's there, it's still attached. Okay, so it's looser now, right? That's why we have two hinges, but it's looser, but it's only rabbinically prohibited. When the top one goes out, the Chacham holds, when the top one goes out, replacing the top one, you just build a Raisa, because the top one missing, it basically is no longer really functional, and therefore putting it back is Mida Raisa. Rabbi Yehuda holds no, as long as it's still attached a little bit, it's still only rabbinically prohibited. Okay, yeah.
So I just think, is this established somewhere that when we get the base of Mikdash, it's only going to be, you only have to deal with biblical?
No. There's in the Makom HaMikdash, meaning it's not talking about when the base of Mikdash stands. Some of there's the rabbinic laws were never instituted to be applicable if they would impact the avoda which is done on Shabbos. Okay, so in any way. So basically this is specific, this is specific to the place of where the base of Mikdash stands, because there's more leniency over there. Certain prohibitions are not instituted for certain prohibitions are not instituted. A lot of rabbinic laws were instituted as a precaution so we don't do X, and that we find a number of places that Kohanim Zrizimheim, the Kohanim were very zealous, were very careful, and therefore we have certain leniencies. Certain things, if they're done for that voda proper. In other words, they brought karbanos on Shabbos, but we're not even talking about that. That for sure can be done. But even things which, generally speaking, rabbinic laws that help, that facilitate the karban, the avoda, the service in the Beis HaMikdash, they were waived in the place of the Beis HaMikdash, but it's not. Doesn't impact anywhere beyond that. Okay. Says the Gemara, Tanur bottom of a brisa. Tzira delan shida teva migdal. The bottom pivot of a door to a carriage, crate, or closet. But migdash machzirin. In the base of migdash, they can be returned. But medina dochikin. In outside the base of migdash, if it starts to slip out, you're allowed to put it back in. Okay. But if it comes out entirely, then you're not allowed to put it back in. Okay, so again, we're learning a little bit, one more detail over here that was not mentioned in the Mishnah, and that is that although in the Mishnah we saw that returning the bottom one is rabbinically prohibited, right? But if it starts to slip, you could kind of push it back in to make sure that it stays. That's not even rabbinically prohibited. The elyon kan v'kan lo yachzer, again, according to the Tanakama, then you are the top one, the upper pivot. If that comes out, then that's biblically prohibited, at least according to the Tanakama, to put that back, and therefore it can't be done even in the Beis HaMikdash area. Okay, the Brisa explains why bottom pivot cannot be placed back in. Gezerah Shema Yitzka. Okay, the reason that you can't place it back in is because there's a concern that you're going to start knocking it back in with a hammer, and that's going to be something which is a makkah bepatish, like doing the final act, and therefore, v'imtaka chayv chatas, and the person does go ahead and take a hammer to put in the bottom pivot back in properly, then you're going to be in violation of a biblical transgression. Okay, shel bar v'shel dus v'shel yatzia. If it's the pit of a pit, a cistern, or an annex, lo yachzer, you're not. That's something which is attached to the ground, and when it's attached to the ground, there is more of a prohibition of building. And therefore, lo yachzer, you're not allowed to reinsert it at all, meaning not even like with a hammer. V'im hechzer chayv chatas, even if a person just puts it back, even without banging it with a hammer, then that is full-fledged building, and therefore it cannot be done on Shabbos. Bottom line is, if we want to take something practical out of here, when things start falling apart, this happens with doors a lot. A screw falls out of a door, handle falls out of a door, don't put that back on Shabbos. Do not put that back on Shabbos without getting into all the details. Replacing something, if the hinges fall out, start putting in, screws back in, things of that nature. Some are going to be rabbinic, some are going to be biblical, but bottom line is putting any of those things back should not be done on Shabbos because it'll be a biblical prohibition. If something gets loose and you just jam it back in, then that's going to be okay. All right, fine. Next Mishnah, before we see this Mishnah, there is a prohibition called mimarech. Mimarech means taking a cream and like softening it out, like pushing it in. So we don't use creams on Shabbos typically. And back in the day, their bandages were almost always done. Their bandages were typically like these harsh type of material, and they would put a cream in it, and they would kind of mush it together as they put on the bandage. Okay, so that was when you think of replacing a dressing, meaning like a bandage, it was always done with a cream. That's how it was done. Okay, and therefore says the Mishnah, machzirin retia b'mikdash. You're allowed to replace a dressing. You're allowed to replace a dressing in the Beis HaMikdash for the sake of the avoda. What that means is as follows. Let's say the avoda, the service in the Beis HaMikdash, the Kohanim, typically, they have to touch the things directly. Kohanim cannot wear gloves in the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, I'm sorry. Even though it's pretty dirty. I don't know. I would want to wear gloves. There's like a lot of blood and this and that. Sorry?
A lot of blood.
A lot of blood.
It's holy blood.
It's holy blood. Okay, so the bottom line is, why can't you wear gloves? Because whatever you're going, not only for the shechting, if you're letting the menorah, you're holding certain things. Because putting on a glove is a chatzitza. Putting on a glove is basically a barrier between the hand. If the Torah says pick up the animal and you do it with a glove, then you just put a chatzitza. And therefore, if you had a wound, if a Kohen had a wound and he's going to do the avoda, like a cut or whatever it is, and he has a wound, you'd have to take off the wound, then do the avoda, and then put the bandage back on. So what the Torah is telling us is that you're allowed to replace the dressing if you took off the bandage so that you could do the avoda, you the Kohen, then you're allowed to replace that dressing on Shabbos. You're allowed to replace that bandage on Shabbos. We're not concerned. Again, what would be the only concern? Normally we don't put a dressing on, and that's why it says avaloba medina, meaning if we did this outside the Beis HaMikdash area, we took off a bandage, we would not be allowed to put it back on. Why? Because there's a gezer, there's a decree that if I'm putting on a bandage, then I may go ahead and rub the cream. But in the Beis HaMikdash, if I took it off for the sake of doing the avoda, and now I'm putting it back on, then it's not a problem. We're not going to have that rabbinic decree of don't put on a bandage, because we're going to waive that rabbinic decree so that you could do the avoda. Yeah?
But you still can't put the cream on.
You still can't put the cream on because that would be biblically prohibited, right? In the Beis HaMikdash, we're just going to go down from, we're going to say rabbinic things are going to be allowed, fine. But if the dressing is being placed for the first time, then it can't be done even in the Beis HaMikdash area. Why? Because the only allowance is I could take it off, right? The only allowance is like this. The only allowance is that a Kohen walks into the Beis HaMikdash and he has a wound and he has a bandage, and we say, okay, we allow you you should know, we'll allow you to put it back on, and therefore he says, oh, good, so I'll take it off so I can do the avoda, I'll put it back on. But if I just show up and I have a cut, we don't say you can put it on for the first time. That's not going to help the avoda. The only reason we're allowing you to put it on is so that you can take it off so you could do the avoda. In other words, it's not just a carte blanche while you're in the area of the Beis Hamikdash, you could waive rabbinic laws. Like, oh, I'm in the Beis Hamikdash, I'm going to check my phone now, I'm going to check my emails, right? No, that can't be done, right? The point is it has to directly relate to the avoda. So if a guy walks into the Beis Hamikdash and he has a bandage, normally we'd say, well, don't take it off, because if you're going to take it off, you're not going to be able to put it back on, right? But here we say you could take it off, because we will let you take it on, but the reason we're doing so is so you can take it off so you can do the avoda. But if the Kohen gets a cut and he now wants to do the avoda, whatever it is, and now he says, can I put on the bandage on the place in the Beis Hamikdash? The answer is no, because there it's not facilitating doing any avoda. Just putting it on for the first time wouldn't facilitate it. It's only you could take it off so you could put it back on, right? You with me? See the difference? Yeah.
So these things about the Beis Hamikdash, they only apply to Kohanim who are providing service. It's not like a giant courtyard with thousands of.
Correct. Correct, exactly. It's only going to be things which are going to facilitate the avoda, meaning it's only going to really be helping Kohanim, or if it's a Yisrael who's doing something which is helping the avoda, but it's going to be unique to that. Again, it's not like you walk into the place of the Beis Hamikdash and all of a sudden all rabbinic laws are waived. There's always going to be relevant, only things which are in some way going to tie in to the avoda. Okay?
And there's no like, I'm on the injured list because like I have a cut, right? Like you.
Okay, I mean, if it's too much of a...
But you do your turn.
Yeah, people, because they would typically, they only have, a few days a year that they're able to do it. So as long as you could do it, you would want to do it. Okay, fine. Says the Gemara in the Brisa. Ton Rabbanan, Ritzia Shapir Shemal Gabe Makam Machzir M'Shabbos. If a dressing falls off on a wound, a person is allowed to replace it on Shabbos. Okay, so now here we are talking now, not inside the Beis Hamikdash. The Chachamim tell us in this Brisa that although there is a prohibition against putting on the bandage, because you might come to using cream, but if it falls off, there's no decree. Again, you still can't put cream, but there is no, if it falls off, putting it right back on, that there is no decree. According to the Chachamim, there's no decree. We're not concerned that in such a case you're going to go and put on cream. It's only when you put it on the first time, that's when you're going to put on cream. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. He says if it comes off completely, you cannot put it back, because he is concerned that you might put on cream. But he says, Huchla kalamata, if it slips downwards, then doch lamala, you're allowed to push it back. Lamala, if it slips upwards, then doch lamata, you're allowed to push it back down. Okay, umegala mixas haratia, and you're allowed to expose part of the dressing, and wipe the surface of the wound, and you're allowed to go ahead and expose the other side of the dressing, meaning you're allowed to raise the bandage to the other side, and wipe the surface, but you shouldn't wipe the dressing itself, because if you do so, right, the bandage itself is it has its cream already embedded in it. You start putting water on it, then you start rubbing it, you're basically going to be doing mimarech. You're going to be smoothing itself. And a person who smooths his dressing on Shabbos is liable for a chatas. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel says, Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha goes like Rabbi Yehuda, who says that if a replacement of a dressing falls, then falls off completely, you cannot put it back on. Right? That was the law of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said if it falls off completely, you can't put it back on. Rav Chisda says, Lo shanu ela shepirsha al gabe kli. The first opinion, who said that you're allowed to put it back on, is only if it falls on a pillow. Aval pirsha al gabe karka divrei kol aser. But if it falls onto the ground, then everyone agrees, then it's forbidden to replace. Okay? So what comes out of this statement is as follows. That means that according to Rav Yehuda, who said you cannot put it back on, would say that even if it falls on a pillow, you cannot put it back on. Meaning, it was the Chachamim who said you couldn't put it back on. We're saying specifically if it falls onto like a utensil, it falls on a bed, it falls on a table, then you're allowed to put it back on. If it falls on the floor, you can't put it back on. What's the difference? Falls on the floor? Not because it's dirty. We would think that in modern day. But the reason is because it falls on the floor, it's if you're doing it the first time. Right? We have similar laws where there comes like chazara on Shabbos, when you take out cholent off. Right? The point is that as long as it's on a utensil, as long as it falls on something, then it's still in the air, right? If it falls on the floor and you put it back on again, it's like you're putting it for the first time. It's like you're starting from scratch. But if it falls like in the air, then it's like you caught it, you're still putting it back on. So what comes out over here is that the Chachamim who said you're allowed to put it back on, they only said so when it falls on a utensil, but even they would agree if it falls on the floor, you can't do it again. So we just also said that halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, which means that even if it falls down on a utensil, you still can't put it back on. Right? Okay, the Chachamim who said you could is specifically when it falls on utensil. Says the Gemara. Amar Mar Bar Rashi. Mar Bar Rashi disagrees. He says, Hava Kamina Kameid Abba. I was standing before my father, Rav Ashi, the great Amora. Naflale Abba, who according to, who is the author of much of the Gemara. Naflale Abe Sadia Bekamahadule, and his wound, his dressing fell off and it fell in a pillow. And he put it back on. Aminale, I said to him, Lo Savrla Mar Lahad Amar Rav Chisda, don't you hold Rav Chisda said, Machloka Shapir Shal Gabe Kli, that they're arguing about when it fell on an object, Val Pir Shal Gabe Karka Aser, and everyone agrees and it falls on the floor, it's forbidden. Vamar Shmuel Lach Rabbi Yehuda, and Shmuel said the Lacha falls like Rabbi Yehuda, which means that even when it falls on a utensil, it's forbidden. So Amar Li Lo Shmieli, and he said, I never heard of such a thing. Kilomar Lo Svirli, as if to say, I don't agree with it. Basically, Rav Ashi held that even Rav Yehuda and the Chacham were only arguing when it fell on the floor, but Rav Ashi held that when it fell on a utensil, everyone agreed you could put it back. Even if we pass like Rav Yehuda, we would say you're allowed to put it back, and that is so it's a dissenting view. So one view says they were arguing about when it falls on a utensil, and everyone agrees when it falls on the floor, and Rav Ashi held they agree when it falls on a utensil, they're arguing when it falls on the floor. Okay, fine. New Gemara about instruments on Shabbos. Okay, there's a general prohibition against using instruments on Shabbos. We'll talk about some practical halacha in a moment, but the basic reason behind it is more or less because of a concern that I might fix the instruments on Shabbos, which is oftentimes going to be a biblical prohibition, and we're going to focus on one of those biblical prohibitions right now. So 102b3. Koshrin Niba B'Migdash. A person is allowed to tie the string of a musical instrument that snapped in the Beis HaMikdash for the sake of the avoda. Okay, so so basically you're allowed to tie a string. Now, tying a knot, is that biblical or rabbinic?
Tying a knot?
Tying a knot. Biblical, right? Kosher is one of the 39 prohibitions. So over here, the reason it's going to be allowed is because until now we've been talking about things which are like really secondary to the avoda. In other words, I want to do the avoda so I could put on a bandage. I have the oils and the spices in a closet so I could fix the closet. But that's not the avoda, right? When it comes to the avoda itself, everyone agrees. Let's say I'm allowed to slaughter an animal on Shabbos, right? For a korban. That is a biblical prohibition. Everyone agrees. So where's the music lie, right? So the music, according to this Tana, is clearly saying that's something which is a main part of the avoda. In other words, when they would bring the karbanos, in addition to Jesse going ahead and slaughtering the animal and sprinkling its blood and all that good stuff, Max would go ahead and play the viola. That would So they would play music not only during the week. Sorry?
So I've recently given up the instrument.
Okay, so but you'd also it would be played on Shabbos as well, and therefore, if a string breaks, right, so then you'd be allowed to tie it back, even though it's a biblical prohibition, you're allowed to do so on Shabbos. Avaloba Medina, but of course, outside the Beis HaMikdash, if a string snaps, you would not be able to tie that string again. V'metchila kan v'kan aser. Sorry, why can you do it?
Yeah.
Because again, just like I could slaughter, according to this Tana, just like I could slaughter an animal on Shabbos, because that's a main part of the avoda, this Tana holds that the music is a main part of the avoda on Shabbos, and therefore, in as much as you could slaughter, he could retie his string.
What is really bad music?
We push him off. They had a stand. Okay.
Where did we first learn that this music was accompanying it?
Where is it found? It's not explicit in the Torah. I'm not sure. Not sure.
I'm not asking to stump him. Just
No. Well, you did stump me.
Because it's
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. It's.
If you start asking for sources, you'd be in the same place that I am.
I'm just saying because it seems that it's a bit of a leap to say that it's
deraisa.
necessary if it's not even mentioned.
Yeah, the question is if it's mentioned in Nach. I don't think. It's alluded to in the Torah. It's alluded to by the masa of that they lifted it up. There's a term that they use when they talk about the Merari Kahas. They carry things. It talks about there's a term that's used there that sounds like music, but that's only a hint. I'm not sure. I wonder if it's. I believe somewhere in when it talks about what. Yeah, it certainly is mentioned in the Nevi'im. I can't. Yeah, we could Google it later. Okay, yeah, fine.
It's like a bit of a leap to say that it would be.
Okay, I hear. Okay, so it says the Gemara v'im b'tchila kanu kan aser. But even those who say it could be done in the base, even those who say it could be done in the Beis HaMikdash, they say it can't be done initially. What does that mean? What that means is that what you're allowed to do is if you're playing and the string snaps, you could retie it. But if you go ahead and want to just like tie the string, come, Shabbos morning, Max comes and his viola string is broken, there he can't go ahead and tie it initially on Shabbos. Why? Because that should have been done before Shabbos, right? In other words, if it's something which could have been done before Shabbos, you should have done it before Shabbos. If it breaks on Shabbos, then you could fix it. Okay, says the Gemara Minhu, we have a question from a Brisa, which says, Nimas kino shnifsika lo hayakasher la onva. If the string of a harp broke on Shabbos in the base of Mikdash, you don't tie it a regular knot, rather you make a bow, right? So I'm telling you very clearly that a bow is something which, at least according to most, is only rabbinically prohibited.
This is like the tefillin case that we had.
Yes. Lo kasha, no contradiction. Harabanan, Rabbi Eliezer. So the Gemara wants to say that the brisa, which says you're allowed to go ahead, the brisa which said you make a bow is according to the Rabbanan. The other opinion is Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer to Amar, which Rabbi Eliezer? Rabbi Eliezer who said Machshir mitzvah dochen es Shabbos, that even preliminary elements supersede Shabbos. This is a reference to something we learned in Masechah Shabbos by a bris milah. That Rabbi Eliezer was of the opinion that not only are you allowed to do the things which are directly related to the bris milah, but even things that help like facilitate, even things which could have been done before Shabbos, but if they help facilitate, you're allowed to do them on Shabbos. Okay. And therefore, according to Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that anything that's preparation supersedes Shabbos, kosher, you're allowed to make a knot. L'Rabbanan Damri Ein Dochen, who said that anything preliminary you can't do. Onva, you're only allowed to bow it. Okay, so basically we're saying that according to Rabbi Eliezer is the author of the Mishnah. Ask the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer, if it's Rabbi Eliezer, then why does the Mishnah say that it can't be done if it can only be done if it snaps? You're not allowed to do it initially. According to Rabbi Eliezer, you're allowed to do any preliminary things can be done on Shabbos. So if you're telling me the author of a Mishnah who says you're allowed to make a knot is Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Eliezer, you should even be able to, even if you come on Shabbos morning and you're like, oh, whoops, I forgot to knot this thing, you'd be allowed to do it because Rabbi Eliezer holds anything preliminary can be done even if it's Doraisa. Gemara says, you're right. Elo kasher Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan. We're going to say a new thing. One is that the Mishnah, which does not distinguish between bowing and knotting, is Rabbi Yehuda, and the Brisa is the Rabbanan. Why? Because we have in Masech Shabbos, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that even making a bow on Shabbos is usher. In other words, the Rabbanan make a difference between knotting and bowing, and that's what we rely on, and that's why we make bows for our shoelaces on Shabbos. But Rabbi Yehuda says that even bowing is usher. In other words, he does not distinguish between making a bow and making a knot. He holds making a bow is actually like making a knot, and therefore usher. So Gemara says, wait a second. Rabbi Yehuda libed aman. So if you want to tell me our Mishnah, which does not distinguish between bowing and knotting, is Rabbi Yehuda, so then and that means that Rabbi Yehuda will be going within whose opinion? Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, who says that I'm allowed to make I can make a knot, and he doesn't say knot versus bow because he holds are all the same, but it's still, that would be going like the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, right? Who says it's permitted. In other words, normally Rabbi Yehuda holds you can't even make a bow. The fact that the Mishnah is saying make a knot and does not distinguish between knots and bows, and you're saying it's Rabbi Yehuda, that means he must be going like Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that anything preparing for a mitzvah is allowed, and therefore you should be able to. So therefore, what? Rabbi Eliezer Kamar 103.1. Then we're back to the original question. It should be done even initially, because if we're now saying we're going within the view of Rabbi Yehuda, who holds it could be done that there's no distinction between a bow and a knot, but now our Mishnah said that you're allowed to only do it if it snaps. Why can't you do it initially? Again, according to Rabbi Eliezer, you should even be able to do it initially. Elo kasha, harab Shimon v'harabanan. Okay, basically we're going to have a couple of answers. We're going to introduce a new brisa with Rav Shimon and Rav Doran. The title of the brisa says, Ben Levi shnifska lo nima b'kinar. A Levi whose harp string breaks, kosher, he's allowed to tie it with a regular knot. That is the Tanakama. Okay, and that is like our Mishnah. Rav Shimon Omer, Onva, you're only allowed to make a bow and not a knot. And that is the Brisa. Rav Shimon Elazar Omer, Afi ena mashmas as a kol. If you were to tie a string with a knot or a bow, it doesn't actually make the same tone. In other words, we want to get back to a place where we can play the music properly. Guess what? If you make a knot, anyone who plays music, ask Max, who plays the viola, he'll tell you that if you make a knot or a bow, it's not going to make the same sounds. Therefore, Ella mishalshal mamata v'korach mamala mishalshal mamala v'korach mamata. Basically, what you have to do is you pull the string up or pull the string down, and then actually just like re-string it without putting in a new string. In other words, usually the string has extra right at the end of the string, so basically just like pull it out, because making a knot or a bow is actually a really bad idea. It's not actually going to help you. Okay, but the bottom line is,
no tying is going to make a difference at all.
No tying.
No tying, and you don't make a bow or a knot because it won't fix the instrument.
Correct. So he says, therefore, pull it out in one way or another, but basically restring it without putting in a new string.
Either or a bow is not going to sound the same.
Exactly, that's Rav Shimon Elazar's view. Exactly, but the bottom line is we've now reconciled. Our brisa goes like the Rav Shimon, who says you make a bow, and the Mishnah goes like the Rabbanan. V'bay Sema, alternatively, Hava ha Rabbanan, that both the Mishnah and brisa are the Rabbanan, lo kasha kan be'emtza, kan min hatzad. Okay, so the Mishnah which said that you knot it, that's when it happened in the middle. When it snaps in the middle, then if you just have a bow, it's going to be a very loose sound. It's not going to have the same, whatever the term is, resonance or whatever. Max will tell us. What's it called? So then it's in the middle. But if it happens at the side, then it's okay if you just make a bow. Right, so it depends where it breaks. By same, alternatively, hava emsa, they'll both be in the middle. Mar savar gazrinan, umar savar gazrinan. That Rav Shimon holds that you make a gezerah. That the one who says that you could only make a bow is because there's a concern that you're going to go ahead and make a knot when it breaks. And the one who holds that there's no such a prohibition, he holds you're even allowed to make a knot. Okay. Bottom line is that again, it's prohibited to play instruments on Shabbos. There's a massive discussion about clapping or banging on Shabbos, whether that's included in the prohibition of making music. There are those who allow it for the sake of mitzvah. In other words, if you're singing like zmiros or for davening, then you'd be allowed to clap or drum, like on your whatever. But otherwise, everyone would agree it should not be done. Whistling is not included in this prohibition. You are allowed to whistle on Shabbos. I don't know. There's a big misconception that you can't. Have a great day.